Hello, everyone. Welcome into the best place for the best takes on this Monday, November 25th, 2024. We had an amazing Week 12 in the NFL. Great weekend of college football. Oklahoma beating Alabama. Alabama's not going to be in the playoff is what it seems like right now. A lot happening across the league. Some upsets this weekend. I think what you saw in both college football and the NFL was great teams or even good teams playing down to their competition. You saw it with the Commanders and the Cowboys. You saw it with the Chiefs and the Panthers. You saw it with the Bears and Minnesota. I feel like Minnesota played down to their level for a certain extent of that game. I think there's a lot of great storylines. I want to get to all of them. First, I want to start here with a primetime game, Saquon Barkley, because to me, Saquon Barkley on Sunday Night Football rushed for 255 yards, finished with 302 scrimmage yards, had 2 touchdowns on the ground, and led that Philadelphia Eagles team to a blowout win over the Rams. That was one of the best Sunday Night Football games I've watched. I would have picked the Eagles going into that game, but by the same token, I didn't think it was going to be that great of a game or that explosive of an offense for the Eagles. To me, what stood out is obviously Saquon Barkley. That team is rolling with him under center. Their guy under center for real, Jalen Hurts, he is playing much cleaner football right now, and I do love and appreciate that. I had been critical of him a couple weeks ago because he's got great quarterbacks do this all the time. That's why I try to take it easy. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, they have these stretches of the regular season or these patches where mechanically they just go all over the place and they become a little turnover happy. Feels like Jalen Hurts has calmed that down. And I think the most underrated part of that team that nobody's going to talk about is A.J. Brown and how physical he plays and the kind of physicality that he plays with. There was no Devonta Smith, and he just was out muscling and wrestling dudes. The coverage was tight yesterday. I think an underrated storyline, because we're going to talk so much about Saquon Barkley this morning across the sports media landscape. Great quarterback play yesterday, great throws on Sunday Night Football, and great coverage on Sunday Night Football. Each of those secondaries was absolutely super tight coverage, tight windows. Even Jalen was like putting the ball into a keyhole. Stafford, of course, even at the end of the game, even though it was like garbage time type coverage, that touchdown to Cooper Kupp late, like he was slinging the pill. And they really did a good job of fitting that ball into tight windows. And it shows you just how talented the NFL is at the quarterback position right now. And I think that was a great showcase on Sunday Night Football. Sometimes you walk out of these Sunday Night Football games and you're like, man, that was a shitty game. That was an awesome game. And I super appreciate what it did for the NFL. To me, it raises my belief of what the Eagles are. I thought going into today, before I'd seen that game, I was going to do an NFL top 10 power rankings, which I'm going to get to in a second. Top 10 current teams. Actually, I'm going to do top 12 current teams and top 12 NFL coaches, because I feel like sometimes in a shtick way, people only do top 10s. That way they can intentionally leave off a guy they don't want to talk about at all. I'm going to do top 12 coaches, top 10 teams. I'm going to get to that in a second. But to me, going into last night before the game started, I thought I'll have the Packers at 4. I'll have the Eagles at 5. And that got flipped after yesterday's game, because what the Eagles show you is they consistently play excellent right now. And they're 9-2, and they've rattled off 7 straight wins. And in those 7 straight wins, Saquon Barkley has over 100 rushing yards in each of them. That team right now is being run through Saquon, run through a really great offensive line, even if they're not as great as they were with Jason Kelsey. And A.J. Brown being as physical as he is, that's a great team. Now, to the people who are saying apologize to Nick Sirianni, absolutely not. Nick Sirianni was the one issue I had with the Eagles yesterday, if anything. A.J. Brown played excellent. He was out-muscling defenders. He literally willed his way to yards after catch yesterday. Jalen Hurts played really clean football, was putting the ball in the keyhole, was making great decisions. Saquon Barkley, need I say more? 302 yards of scrimmage, 255 on the ground, 2 touchdowns on the ground. He is the little engine that could, or the big engine that could, for that Eagles offense. The problem that I have comes down to the coaching. Nick Sirianni had the opportunity on a 4th down to punt the ball away before the end of the first half. He decided to run a QB draw with Jalen Hurts down the middle when he knew if we don't convert here, the Rams have an opportunity with about a second or 2 left to throw a Hail Mary with Matthew Stafford. I know it's not a guarantee, but me personally, I'm not going to put my team in that situation. I'm going to punt the ball, and that's that. For Nick Sirianni to make the decision amongst the many boneheaded decisions that he made in yesterday's game, we're just going to run it with Jalen, shows me this team, it is the perfect example of this Eagles team and their excellent talent outpacing and overachieving what their coaching staff allows them to do. It is talent overcoming crappy coaching, in my opinion, in Philadelphia. And Nick Sirianni showed that yesterday. And for people to say, they're 9-2, Nick Sirianni's doing something right. No, he shows you why when you give him the opportunity to win you a game or to just continue playing the game, he will make the wrong decision. I did not like that at all, and to me, that was my biggest problem with the performance. But I'll also say this, because I think this is really important as well. To me, I will not be upset if Lamar Jackson wins his third NFL MVP, but I believe this is the year where a running back should win it. I believe this is the year where a position that is not a quarterback should win the MVP award. What Saquon Barkley and what Derrick Henry are doing right now cannot be overstated. Those guys are true MVPs to their teams. They are the most valuable players when you consider what they are being paid, the running back market, the conversation we were having about 2.5 years ago in the offseason about running backs being dead and not necessary. What Saquon is showing you now and what Derrick Henry is showing you now is running backs are very much so a part of hard-nosed football. They are an important part of playing playoff football, and they are an important part of playing great football. I don't think you can overstate that. And I do believe that Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley should be involved in that MVP conversation because this feels like the year. I feel like I grew up in an era where you had Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers, who were not just great quarterbacks, but also gave you great numbers in the regular season. Like Tom Brady, through the stretch that Mahomes is on right now, had like 20 more passing touchdowns. Those guys were awesome. And I think Lamar Jackson falls into that category. But we've already seen like a Patrick Mahomes, who's a great quarterback, have a really rubbish or like a really sluggish regular season 2 years in a row now. We've seen Josh Allen put up really good numbers, but like not quite as great as we were used to seeing from the all-time greats. To me, Lamar Jackson is the best and most consistent regular season quarterback in my lifetime and maybe ever when it comes to his statistical performances and the kind of stuff that he gives you on the field. But if there was a year to say, you know what, there's other guys who are valuable to a team beyond a quarterback, it's the running back position, it would be this year. And Adrian Peterson, won the award in 2012. It has been over, what's the math on that, like 12 years, 11 years at this point. It's time for a running back to win the award, and more importantly, it is time for someone who is not a quarterback to win the award because there are more valuable pieces to a football team than a quarterback. And I think this year will be the year that we see that. I want to move on here to a story about a former NFL MVP because there's a lot surrounding him right now. Aaron Rodgers. So currently Aaron Rodgers apparently is a little bit I would say trouble in paradise, but the Jets are anything but paradise, especially this time of the year. It's cold in New York. Fans are pissed off. It is not a good time to be a New York Jets fan. Diana Rossini broke a story over the weekend, and I want to read the quote here exactly as it is. It appears increasingly likely that the four-time MVP who is banged up could be placed on injury reserve or possibly benched over the next few weeks. Here's a new quote. Some around the league say they won't be surprised if Rodgers is cut in season. That's Diana Rossini for The Athletic reporting. You know how I know she's right? Because every time she came out with a report last season, Aaron Rodgers would go on the Pat McAfee show and talk about how she was totally wrong and that he didn't know who her sources were, and he would immediately talk down to her essentially and say that reporting is BS, and he would get real like ticked off about it. That to me is the dead giveaway that she's got sources in that building, and she always has. So last quote here from Rossini that I really care about. Rossini also noted that, quote, her understanding is that Rodgers still wants to play in 2025, just not for the New York Jets. Quick observation here before we get into the potential landing spots for Aaron Rodgers, because I want to talk about it. There has been so much. I grew up in a time where there was a debate between Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers, and to me, the debate is over. Tom Brady, at Aaron Rodgers' age, just finished coming off winning a Super Bowl and won an MVP. Aaron Rodgers, at his current age, is not a terrible quarterback, but is not top 10, is not top 5, is certainly not playing MVP football, is not top 15. He's probably 16 or 17 right now, and that's giving him a lot of leeway. Aaron Rodgers is not what he used to be, and the cliff that he has fallen off of performance-wise cannot be overstated. And I think when you look back at this era, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to regret having gone and played for the Jets. I think he's going to regret not ending his career in Green Bay. I think he's going to regret thinking the grass was greener on the other side when, in fact, the green was just greed and vomit. That's all that was over there with the Jets. It has been a terrible experience to me. It has lowered his stock. It has lowered his legacy a little bit. To think that Aaron Rodgers, who was this unstoppable, hyper-efficient quarterback that we'd never seen before, that threw one of the best balls in the league, that before Patrick Mahomes came into the league was considered the greatest quarterback talent of all time, not the GOAT, but the greatest talent of all time, and the fall-off that he has undergone with this Jets team, where now He was mad because in Green Bay, he didn't get to make all the decisions. And he was mad because he didn't get to say over personnel. And he was mad because they wouldn't bring in free agents. And he was mad because they didn't bring in his guys or do what he wanted to when he wanted to. And now that Aaron has that right, Aaron has never looked worse. There is a reason why in an office, you have a manager, you have an employee, you have a vice president, you have a director of ops, you have an HR person. There's a reason why in football, you have a head coach, you have a GM, and you have a quarterback. And there is a reason why those players or those positions are not the same person. Bill Belichick learned this at the end. Football has become too complex of a sport and too big of an animal to tame that one person can handle that responsibility, or that one person can, without bias, effectively make the proper decision in each of those positions. Aaron now has all the decision-making power in the world. He brought in his friends. He had Rob Saleh fired, or he at least knew about it. He let them essentially move off of Joe Douglas last week, which was the big story that I haven't even mentioned because it happened after our show. It happened on Tuesday of last week. This is a Jets team that is owned by a very impulsive owner in Woody Johnson, who has now hired a media company. No offense to the 33rd team. I know people who work there. I'm a fan of people who work there. I think what Mike Tannenbaum is doing is great, but by the same token, I would never expect the Miami Dolphins to hire me to choose who their next head coach is going to be. And maybe that's too little of an example, and maybe that's laughable, but I don't think the Indianapolis Colts should hire Pat McAfee to do their head coaching search. To me, that's not a good enough fit. And I know the 33rd team is very analytics-based, and they're very forward-facing, and they lean into what football is in 2024, and they look at more than just your average box score. But by the same token, the Jets deciding to hire the 33rd team as a consultant who is owned by Mike Tannenbaum, their former GM. You're asking your former GM to try and help you find your current GM when you fired that former GM. It is the ultimate Jets decision in the midst of this horrible era to be a Jets fan. So let's move on to this. Where is Aaron Rodgers going? Because he is not going to play for the Jets next year. And even though he might not play football next year, which is where I would lean, I think he's off somewhere else. The top three teams that seem to come up in a lot of conversations are the Las Vegas Raiders, the Cleveland Browns, and the Minnesota Vikings. Two of those teams I think could happen, the first two, just because of how dysfunctional they are. The Browns make the wrong decision at every turn. They're currently dealing with a massive Deshaun Watson contract, and if they brought in Aaron, it would have to be on a backup quarterback salary. Would Aaron do it? Maybe because of the talent, but by the same token, it's not a very well-coached or run team, in my opinion. Even though Kevin Stefanski, I told you, was probably a top 10 head coach in the league, right now, he's certainly not performing like it, even though it is tough to do so with the current talent and the current situation. I just don't think he's all that as a head coach that it would motivate Aaron or help him or fix him or be enough to mentor him to get back to playing like his old self. The Raiders have been a team that have been in position to make important key changes all throughout my lifetime for the better, and they've consistently made the wrong decision. I would not be surprised if in a year where they had the opportunity to bring in Shedeur Sanders via the draft and maybe even hire his father, Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, I wouldn't be shocked if they decide, you know what, let's go with a veteran like Aaron Rodgers. Let's see what he can give us. He'll sell tickets in Vegas. Why not? That, to me, feels like it could be a good fit just because situationally it would be such a clown show that it might just work. Now, there is a football reason as to why that might work, which I think does deserve to be said. Rookie tight end Brock Bowers is a superstar. He's got 70 receptions, 703 yards, 4 touchdowns this season. They've also got Jacoby Myers, who is pretty underrated, who signed through 2025. Aaron might be able to make do with that team in that division, which I don't know. To me, it's a tougher division than the one he's currently in, and that's saying something because the AFC East is technically not a cakewalk with Tua and with Mike McDaniel, who, if nothing else, are going to win regular season games, and the Buffalo Bills, who are a really strong team, one of the best in the AFC. Currently, I think the best. Moving on to the third team, which I think could make sense for Aaron, the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings with Kevin O'Connell right now, who I believe is a top 5 or 6 head coach in the NFL, that could be an interesting situation because that, to me, it's essentially Aaron really would be following Brett Favre's lead. He would leave the Green Bay Packers, he would go to the Jets, or he would leave the Green Bay Packers and end up playing for a different team like the Minnesota Vikings. If Aaron followed Brett Favre's career path to the Minnesota Vikings, it would be the most laughable, the most ironic, and the most iconic thing in arguably all of sports history in the NFL. That could not be a more fitting ending to Aaron Rodgers' career, but there is also a football perspective to this. You don't know what you have in J.J. McCarthy. You want to mentor him, and maybe You look around the league and you say the best guys are the ones who have the opportunity to sit. You let J.J. McCarthy sit another year while he's recovering from his injury, even if he is capable of playing, and you say, learn from Aaron a little bit. It helped out Jordan Love, clearly. Let's see what you can learn on the bench while Aaron plays with T.J. Hawkinson, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, a great head coach in Kevin O'Connell, and then just figure out how to win games. And even though I think Brian Flores will get some head coaching opportunities and looks this offseason, I don't know if because of the baggage in Miami and what Tua said at the start of the year, if he ends up getting hired or not as a head coach. I think he may end up staying in Minnesota for another year because he doesn't get a job, quite frankly. So to me, that could be a much more interesting and possible and plausible landing spot for Aaron Rodgers than I think people are willing to give credence to. But the Aaron thing is blowing up in their face, and I think it's closer to the end than we realize, especially if they put him on IR. I assume Aaron will go on the Pat McAfee show tomorrow, interested in seeing what he says. He might say a whole lot of nothing. It'll be the first interview since Joe Douglas, their GM, got fired. But I think it's ending in New York, and it's ending in a very ugly fashion. I want to get to other stories, though. So Daniel Jones was released by the Giants last week. I talked about it. I went through the stats last week, one of the highest-rated takes ever on this show. There are statistics to support that, yes, Daniel Jones was not the only problem with the Giants, but he certainly was not their solution. Now, there are some landing spots that Jordan Schultz is reporting this morning. The Ravens, the Vikings, the Lions, the 49ers, and the Dolphins. To me, I would love to see Daniel Jones on the 49ers just because you think about what Kyle Shanahan is capable of doing when it comes to the quarterback position. Kyle Shanahan has always done more with less at the quarterback position in both the drafts and the trades. Jimmy G, Trey Lance, moving on to Brock Purdy. He has had to do more with less his entire NFL career. Look at what he did with Matt Ryan. No disrespect to Matt Ryan. I don't think Matt Ryan is nearly as good as he played that 1 year with Kyle Shanahan as his OC and that Super Bowl run with the Falcons, which ultimately ended in heartbreak, 28-3. But if you give Kyle Shanahan right now, with Brock Purdy seemingly having a shoulder injury that we're not sure as to the timetable of this morning, and you see what they were last night against the Packers, or yesterday against the Packers, wasn't great. Just a lot to work through, right? Even with Christian McCaffrey back, you also have Trent Williams out. You had George Kittle go nuclear, even though he was injured. There's some great pieces on that team, but right now they're sitting at 5-6, and they need somebody under center. I think Daniel Jones with Kyle Shanahan could be exactly what the 49ers need to not necessarily make a postseason run, but be respectable this season and just figure out what their flaws are. Because right now, that 49ers team is a flawed team. They're not a top 5 team in the NFL right now, and they're not a top 2 team in the NFC, which is saying something compared to the standard that most people had for them going into the year. I want to make sure I'm not missing out on anything. All my stories that we talked about. Okay, so let's start here. Let's continue here. I'm going to run through these really quickly. Top 10 NFL teams, power rankings currently, and top 10 NFL head coaches. Because to me, we have not done one of these in a while, and I don't like to overdo it. But I think with so much parity in the NFL right now, and so much confusion as to what teams are, who teams are, and what their identity is, I think it's time to talk about it. I do want to, quickly before we go on there, at this time, it seems, and I want to make sure of this, so the Giants have not fired Brian Daboll and their GM Joe Schoen quite yet. But a reporter that I trust, who is a Giants insider, a New York insider, Wesley Steinberg, reported yesterday that breaking, right after the game essentially, the Jets are firing both head coach Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. I believe that decision, that was made before the Eagles game. After the Eagles game, that decision is certainly being made just because of Joe and the fact that he let Saquon Barkley walk out the door. To me, that is all but said and done. I think that's the next head coach firing. I think you could put money on that. I think the Vegas odds are probably pretty crappy on that because it has such a high likelihood of happening. So let's go here. NFL team rankings currently. I'm going to go 1 through 12, not just 1 through 10, because I feel like sometimes people in a very shtick way say, you know what, I'm going to decide not to include this guy in the top 10. I'll put him at 11, but I don't want to talk about him, so we won't go there. Top 12 NFL teams. To me, number 1 has to be the Detroit Lions, led by Dan Campbell, one of the best head coaches in the NFL right now. I would say top 2, and I really want to say number 1, but to me, that would be disrespecting Andy Reid. Dan Campbell, if you watch that post-game speech, is one of the best head coaches in the NFL, and he deserves all the credit in the world for what he has done with this Detroit Lions team. They are so physical. They lose Aiden Hutchinson, and they are still great on their defensive line. The back end has gotten so much better over the past few years. We know what Ben Johnson brings offensively. You cannot stop them. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, the best offensive line in the league, led by Penei Sewell. Jared Goff under center making great decisions. The underrated MVP quarterback, MVP candidate at the quarterback position, I'd say behind Lamar Jackson right now. Amon-Ra St. Brown, that team is just rolling right now. There is nobody that can stop them. To me, I believe the Lions end up making it to the Super Bowl where they ultimately face off against the Chiefs as the Chiefs try to three-peat, and I think that's a very good team. I think they ultimately lose that game, spoiler alert, but right now, for the sake of power rankings, the Lions are number one, and it's not particularly close. Number two, I would say, are the Buffalo Bills. To me, the Buffalo Bills lost Stephon Diggs, their wide receiver one, and Josh Allen looks better and is playing significantly better. And the only reason that I have them above the Kansas City Chiefs is because we have a head-to-head win from them. And the interesting situation is it feels like even though the Bills were on a bye week, feels like they won this week when you watch what the Chiefs did against the Panthers. That was an ugly game for the Chiefs, and I'll be the first to say I don't really care about how they win as long as they do win in the regular season because we know they're going to turn it on in the postseason. But that win does kind of feel like a loss this morning, and it does worry me to a certain extent. Like, why are the Chiefs playing down to their competition so much? I'm sure in January and February, I'll be sitting here laughing about how they're on their way to their third straight Super Bowl and how they're going to win the entire thing once more. But it does cause some concern for me. Number three would have to be the Kansas City Chiefs right behind the Buffalo Bills. So you've got one NFC team followed by two AFC teams. Right after that, I would say, is the Philadelphia Eagles. To me, I had the Philadelphia Eagles at 5 going into last night before the game started because I thought, you know what, the Green Bay Packers, even though Jordan Love drives me crazy, they are a team to beat. I think after yesterday's dominant win on Sunday Night Football, you have to put the Philadelphia Eagles at number 4 right above that Packers team. Because to me, when you look at the NFC and you look at the rosters out there, you look at the Eagles' offensive line, you look at their back end, you look at their run game, you look at how they can win in the trenches and how they can bleed the clock out with Saquon and even Kenneth Gainwell getting his first touchdown of the year yesterday. You also have Jalen Hurts playing his cleanest football right now. You have A.J. Brown, who without Devonta Smith was still electric, was playing physical football yesterday. That is important to me. I think that is a team that can make an extended postseason run. They're 9-2 right now. The only doubt I have surrounding them, and I talked about it earlier in the show, has got to be their head coach, Nick Sirianni, who makes decisions that make me scratch my head and wonder, what the hell is he doing? Number 5 has to be the Packers. The only reason the Packers aren't higher on this list is because, to me, even though Jordan Love was mentored by Aaron Rodgers for years, it's hilarious to me how he reminds me more of Brett Favre when he plays than Aaron does. Aaron was all about precision and not turning the ball over, especially in the regular season. Jordan Love has more Brett Favre to him, so when he wore that Brett Favre jersey earlier in the year, I'm like, you know what? That's kind of fitting. That's kind of exactly who I think of when I watch Jordan play. Jordan is one of the top 10 or 12 quarterbacks in the league. There's no doubt about it. But to me, he makes decisions sometimes that make you wonder, man, how are we going to win this game when he keeps on digging us into a hole, even though he does have the potential with his arm and with his playmaking ability to win you games. It's kind of a 50-50 thing with him. And the balls that he throws downfield are just like double coverage, triple coverage. I don't get it, but that's Jordan Love football, and you have to live by it and die by it if you are a Packers fan. Number 6, I can't believe I'm saying this because I would have never predicted this preseason, the Pittsburgh Steelers. To me, Mike Tomlin's a top 5 head coach in the NFL right now. He is single-handedly willing this team to wins. Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, the island of misfit toys. The Steelers just find ways to win, and Mike Tomlin just knows how to win, and the Steelers deserve so much respect, and every year I doubt them, and every year they overachieve, and I feel like that's been the same thing for the Steelers for a few years now. I genuinely can't imagine what Mike Tomlin would look like with a great NFL quarterback, and to be honest, I kind of don't want to know because I love how he finds ways to scrap together wins with great situational football and just being prepared and winning through football IQ, old school football, not analytics based. Let's run the ball well. Let's bleed the clock. Let's not turn the ball over, and let's go out there and make 2 or 3 big plays a game that help us win the entire thing. Mike Tomlin football is the best kind of football, right there with Dan Campbell, MCDC. Right? That's my opinion. Chargers to me would fall at 7 on this list. I think the Chargers are so much better than people give them credit for, and I think tonight on Monday Night Football, the world is going to learn who the Chargers are when they take on the Ravens, because if I had to pick one team or the other, I would pick the Chargers to win tonight on Monday Night Football. It's the Harbaugh Bowl. I have a lot of respect for John Harbaugh on this Ravens team, and I think they're one of the best rosters in the AFC, period. But Jim Harbaugh, situationally, has proven he's going to put his team in a position to win those situational games and those situational moments on third down. He's going to punt the ball. He's going to play for field position. He's not going to go no risk it, no biscuit. He's going to play methodical football, and once he gets a lead, he's going to choke you out like a python. He is going to bleed that clock out, and there's nothing you can do about it. To me, Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers go at 7. Baltimore Ravens at 8. Minnesota Vikings at 9. Washington Commanders at 10. San Francisco 49ers at 11, and the Tampa Bay Bucks, who I think are one of the most underrated teams in the NFL, finish out that list at 12. Head coach rankings. To me, you've got to start with Andy Reid. You have to be willing to admit that Andy Reid is the best head coach in the NFL right now. Even if it doesn't feel like his team is playing their best football, there's no doubt in my mind, in a playoff game, there's no coach I would rather have in the NFL right now than Andy Reid. 2, though, and it's a very close 2, I almost put him at 1, is Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell is the ultimate motivator. He is the perfect blend between DeMeco Ryan and Mike Tomlin, while also being, an offensive-minded guy as well. Like, really knows how to make his team run offensively. Hired Ben Johnson, one of the best hires at the coordinator position in probably the last decade in the NFL. What Ben has done year after year with Detroit and Dan Campbell cannot be overstated. I would put Jim Harbaugh at 3. I would put Mike Tomlin at 4. I would put Kevin O'Connell at 5. Considering what Kevin O'Connell has done this season, he is one of the best head coaches in the NFL. I would go Matt LaFleur 6, John Harbaugh at 7, Kyle Shanahan at 8. A steep fall off from where he once was, but the reality is Kyle is not coaching as well right now as he could be. He acknowledged that post-game. The injuries, he acknowledged that as well, but he also knows and he acknowledged we've got to be better even if we don't have the best players out on the field. He's not coaching these guys to the extent that he can be right now. Sean McVay would be number 10 behind Sean Payton right now, because what Sean Payton has achieved with this Broncos team and Bo Nix in year 1, once again, cannot be overstated. Bo Nix over the last several weeks, I think, has had 19 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. That is all Sean Payton, and I give credit to Bo Nix, but Sean Payton has already shown you what he can do with a accurate, smaller than you'd like quarterback, and he's doing exactly that right now with Bo Nix. I would put DeMeco Ryan at 11 and Sean McDermott at 12. Those are my top 10 NFL teams right now, top 12 NFL teams, top 12 coaches, and I think the NFL is in very good hands as we head into Thanksgiving. We've got some great matchups on the other side of this, so I will now move on to our guest, who I want to talk to about our Thanksgiving games. So joining me now is one of the best NFL content creators in the business right now. I just asked him right before our interview, man, how long have you been doing this? And he said about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. I thought he's been doing it for 5 years with how good the content is, with how interesting and engaging the narratives are. I think he's one of the best guys out there. He's partnered with FanDuel Sportsbook, so obviously he's legit. I'd like to welcome in Donald Coletta. Don, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk some football. It was a interesting weekend around the league. Looked like there was going to be not many upsets, and then the NFL does what the NFL does, and now everything's a mess again.
Exactly. So I want to start there. Last night, I think I expected an Eagles win. I did not expect a win that dominant from them, though. Saquon going for 255 on the ground, the 2 touchdowns, 302 total yards from scrimmage. What do you like about that Eagles team? What stood out to you about last night's game?
Well, Saquon's now jumped to 3rd in MVP odds, which I think is just really cool that a running back's even in the conversation, because we haven't seen that in a long time. And I just think the Eagles are just dominant on every part of the ball. The running game has really came together, and I think they're just a really hard team to stop right now.
I also one of my takes before I had you on the show was I believe that guys like Saquon and Derrick Henry should be a part of the MVP conversation more so than ever, because when we were growing up, we had Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers, like guys who weren't just great quarterbacks overall, but like were great regular season quarterbacks, and the numbers match that. I feel like as time has gone on, or at least in this era, Josh Allen is a great quarterback and he gives you great performances, but his numbers aren't like insane. Even Mahomes, who is great during the postseason, has really clunker regular seasons now 2, maybe even 3 years in a row. To me, Lamar Jackson is the greatest, most consistent regular season quarterback I've ever seen. But if there was a year to get other guys involved outside of the quarterback position in this MVP conversation, I would think it would be this year with Derrick Henry and with Saquon Barkley. So I want to ask you, as a guy who focuses on stories so much with your content, what do you think is the better story? Is it Derrick Henry after leaving the Titans after they believed he was essentially washed? Would he becoming the MVP be a better story, or would it be Saquon going to an arch rival? What do you think?
I think that's tough. I think they both be awesome stories. I would probably just say Saquon just because of his personality. I just love how Saquon is as a person. Like he's just a great guy. Everyone's loved Saquon, so I think it's really cool to finally see him contributing to winning because he's always been this great player, but we've never seen him in playoff games that are going to matter in a team that's going to have a chance to win the Super Bowl. And
I
I think the
agree.
other thing I really like about the Eagles is just Jalen Hurts. He has a couple bad games to end last year, and it seems like everyone forgot about him. 2 years ago, he doesn't get hurt to end the year. He wins the MVP, and a few plays go different in the Super Bowl. We're talking about him having one of the best Super Bowl performances ever. But a few things go differently. He has a bad end to last year, and it seems like everyone kind of forgot about Jalen Hurts and how good of a quarterback he actually is.
So let's talk about the Super Bowl performance and who they went up against, the Kansas City Chiefs, because this weekend they played a game against the Panthers that, to me, they come out with a win, but almost feels like, public perception wise, feels like a loss. And it feels like the Bills, who are on a bye week, sort of won here. Tell me, what do you think about the AFC race right now, especially after last week's result where the Bills did beat the Chiefs?
I think it's really interesting, but the main thing I'm focusing on the AFC is tonight with the Chargers. So I think we have the top four teams. We got the Chiefs, we got the Ravens, we got the Steelers. It's top three. And I think the Chargers are kind of in that middle area, and the Bills, top four. And then I think the Chargers are in that middle area. I think tonight they could kind of prove if they belong in that top tier of really contending, or if they're more towards the Broncos on the wild card side, where they're going to make the playoffs, but they're really not going to make a run because they already lost to the Steelers and they already lost to the Chiefs. But in both of those games, Herbert was hurt. So I think tonight's really a chance for the Chargers to prove themselves. Are they a fringe playoff team, or are they in that top tier where if the right matchups, the right games, they could maybe be in the Super Bowl?
I'm really looking forward to tonight. It's going to be an awesome game. Everybody's calling it the Harbaugh Bowl. And since you brought up your top five, I assume you're talking about the top four in the AFC. I'm actually talking about on today's show my top 10. So I want to get your thoughts on it, reactions. Number one, Detroit Lions. Number two, Buffalo Bills. Number three, Kansas City Chiefs. Number four, Philadelphia Eagles after last night. I had them at five, but what we saw from the Packers, and I love Jordan Love, but the turnovers make me feel like even though he learned from Aaron Rodgers, he's got more Brett Favre in him than we give him
Oh,
credit for. I would go five Packers, six Steelers, seven LA Chargers, eight Baltimore Ravens. Now, I feel like we all like the Ravens. We think they're a really good team, but situationally, sometimes they've got these moments where like they come up short and it kind of makes you wonder, man, what's John Harbaugh doing? What is that team doing? It's more of a decision-making team, decision-making thing with me than it is like a question of their talent, because they're one of the most talented teams in the league. Would you move any teams there? What do you think about the order?
I feel like you're low on the Ravens, is what the public's going to say with those rankings. But I actually don't totally disagree because when the running game isn't working for that team, things get really disjointed. You saw when they played the Raiders, that offense just looked awful because they shut down the run early. So I think they have more to prove because they're not a one-dimensional team, but when the run isn't working, things do not look great in Baltimore.
And here's my thing about the Ravens, too. And I'm glad you brought it up and I'm glad you kind of see it this way. I really am impressed when Derrick Henry gets running downhill and he has those crazy games, which he's had more of than not this season, and they look like they're unstoppable. To me, though, the reason why I immediately temper the hype a little bit is because we saw what they looked like week one against the Kansas City Chiefs, where they
Yeah.
shut down Derrick Henry and they shut down Lamar Jackson, and that offense felt really stagnant for about three-fourths of that game. Now things have sort of changed, and they went on that crazy streak in September after that game, had a great October. Things have kind of quieted surrounding them. I still think they're one of the top four teams in the AFC, for example. But to say that they're these world beaters or that there's no way of beating them, I don't feel as comfortable saying that as maybe other people do. That's why I'm not 100% on that hype train.
100%, especially in the playoffs in the NFL. There's going to be one game where the run's just not working. You have to play very good teams. You have weeks to game plan, and it's just bound to happen at least one time where they're going to have to prove that they can win without the run. And I'm not sure if they've proven that yet.
Okay, so as a storyteller, I'm sure this story has you a little bit fascinated. What we've seen over the last few days, a report came out from the Athletics' Diana Rossini that apparently, I want to read the quote correctly, some around the league say they won't be surprised if Rodgers is cut in season. Rossini also noted that, quote, her understanding is that Rodgers still wants to play in 2025, just not for the Jets. So I was going
Yeah.
through some names and some lists of some potential candidates for Aaron. The Raiders feel like they could be a spot. The Browns feel like they could be a spot. The Vikings feel like they could be a spot. And those first two are simply because they are so dysfunctional that I think they would make the wrong decision in bringing him on. What do you feel like is the best fit for Aaron Rodgers? And what do you think is a storyteller about this really weird story surrounding Aaron over the last year and a half?
I think he's in a really weird spot because, like you said, I was reading some articles and they were the similar teams listed, like Raiders, even the Titans. And I just can't see him going there because remember when he went to the Jets and he went on McAfee? It doesn't seem like he wants to play like meaningless football. Seems like he's only going to play if he has a chance to win. And I don't think he kind of wants to be a 1 year bridge quarterback right now. So that the only team that makes sense for me would be the Browns because they have the pieces where if you bring Aaron Rodgers in, you could potentially contend. And I just can't see him not going somewhere where he's not going to be a contender.
I agree. And I think the Titans thing to me would have made a lot of sense had Vrabel still been there. But with him out of the picture, it's like you don't have your friend there. You really don't have a lot. They debuted like their sixth or seventh different right tackle yesterday. Will Levis, interestingly enough, is outperforming Caleb Williams over the past several weeks. So actually, let me ask you about that. I was looking at the stats, and Caleb Williams made a really bad decision yesterday in overtime that to me was like, man, I don't care what you did during the entirety of that, I guess, regular play, right, and regulation. But what he did in overtime of holding on to the ball and putting them in that long third down situation, when for the first time all game, they ask you, hey, don't go out and lose us the game. You don't have to go out and win us the game. Just don't lose it. And he puts them in that spot. To me, there's got to be some blame on him, right? They got rid of Shane Waldron. They're probably going to make a head coaching switch this offseason. How much of it is Caleb, though? And does he upset you or frustrate you as an NFL fan as much as he does me?
I think the main thing is CJ Stroud's hurting Caleb Williams more than Caleb Williams. I think last year these expectations just became insane. You saw his receivers, and everyone just expected him to get to the NFL and be a great playoff quarterback, lead the Bears to the playoffs. I think it's just such a different game. It's so much harder in the NFL. I think we just got to give Caleb some time. It's more expectations, less Caleb, would be my take on that.
Rightfully so. Yeah, he has some great moments. He has some moments
Yeah,
that make me think, scratch my head and think, man, what are we doing here?
yeah.
Thanksgiving slate is a really fun slate. I want to get your opinion on that. Bears, Lions, two great teams. One great team in a great division. One kind of good team that would be better if they weren't in such a great division. We've also got the Dolphins and the Packers, and we have the Cowboys and the Giants. Of those games, which are you most interested in?
Probably the Bears just because of Caleb. I think Caleb's looked a lot better in the 2 weeks with the new play caller. They're letting him run the ball a lot more, which you have to do. Obviously, you pick the number one. He's going to be your franchise quarterback. You don't want him to get hurt. But part of the game, part of his game is running the ball. You need to let him be free. And I think they've done that. He's been a lot better against the blitz. And they're always divisional games with those teams are always good games. So I think that should be a good battle. People are going to probably expect the Lions to come in and just kill the Bears. But I think a divisional game like that on Thanksgiving, Caleb could surprise some people and it would be a much better game.
I agree. What are you thinking about so college football playoff is around the corner, and obviously a lot of parity right now, and a lot
Yeah.
happened this weekend. Some big time games there as well. Oklahoma taking down Alabama. What is the best story in college football right now? Because there was a time when I thought it might be Ryan Williams, and because Alabama has performed so poorly, I feel like he's out of that conversation just because of team result. What is the best story in the college football playoff?
That's tough because there's just so many with the transfer portal. We've seen so many guys kind of get written off, and now it's like Dylan Gabriel starting at Oregon, the number one team in the country. I don't think I could put my finger on just one because there's just so many guys out there that have been able to get into better spots and kind of prove they are really great players on the college level. I think Indiana would probably be up there as well. Obviously, they lost to Ohio State, didn't look pretty, but they should still get in the playoff. And I think that's really cool. Kurt Signetti, first year as a coach, completely turning around a program like Indiana. You don't really see that in college football. Maybe college basketball now with the transfer portal, you can get two or three really good players. But football, there's 11 guys on each side of the ball, special teams. You have to get a whole coaching staff. So I think that's been just really impressive to be able to turn a program around like that.
Over the weekend, I also saw a tweet from an FSU fan retweeting a report about Quinn Ewers and his injury and people speculating about that. I'm not sure what the update is as of right now. I haven't checked in the last few hours, but they were making the argument like, oh, I don't make the rules,
Yeah.
but if Quinn Ewers is down, then they're eliminated from the playoff. And my immediate reaction was FSU did not have Arch Manning on the bench. So that argument is null and void to me. Am I crazy? I believe that Texas is one of the best teams in college football. I personally think, even though Oregon will have the nod, I think Texas is the best, and I think Texas is going to win the Natty this year. Am I crazy for that? Do you see where I'm coming from?
No, I mean, if you just look at the Georgia game, they turned to Arch in like the second quarter. So obviously they trust him a step below Quinn Ewers. So yeah, Texas gets a little worse for sure, but they're still a playoff caliber team, even if Quinn Ewers is done for the year, which I don't think he is. But even if that FSU argument was correct, you have a guy that's right there. So you can't leave Texas out of anything.
I agree. What is the best story in the NFL right now? It feels like we're approaching the end of the season here. Playoff football is about to start. What is the best story to you?
I think the Chargers. I really love the Hardballs. And I just think the fact that they got rid of so many good players, they kind of expected this to be a bad year for the Chargers, take some time for Harbaugh to kind of figure it out. And they're right there in the mix. They're playing really good football. You see the locker room after the game. It seems like the guys are having fun. They're a team. I just think they've been really cool to watch. And it's cool to see Herbert maybe play some meaningful football because he's been a great player, but the one knock on him has been he hasn't been able to win. And I think last week really proved that the Bengals, it felt like that wild card game a few years ago. And then it was like, oh, not the same Chargers. They don't have Brandon Staley. They have Harbaugh now, and they're not going to blow that lead. They're going to figure it out in the end and come out with the win still.
I loved it. That was a fun game. I talked to NFL superfan NFL Mike, who I know
Yeah.
that you mutually know as well. And man, he was real excited about that win. What does your week look like, man? You feel like it feels like you're always cranking out content. I open up my For You page and there's always a new Don video out. Are you doing this all day? Are you a full-time student too? Because that's another thing I admire. You're also a student. I know that. So like, how do you find balance? Because it's tough for me.
So I'm in my last semester, so I only have classes Monday, Wednesday. So it's kind of just whenever I could get content out. I'll try and listen. My drive to school is like an hour, hour and a half. So I'll listen to podcasts there, kind of just like get ideas of like, oh, that's an interesting story, or like, what's the deal with that? Do some more research, be like, oh, I could find that based off that one storyline. So it's kind of just trying to find the stories and then finding the time to do some research, write them down, and get them up.
And then what's the goal? What do you want to do?
I'm not sure. I just noticed that everything's moving towards content. And I think if I have a good grasp on making content, you can kind of figure it out from there. And this was like the easiest way to get reps, in my opinion. Because if you're going out making videos, that's great, but you can only make so many videos. But there's always so many stories. So it's like I could make like 5, 6 videos a week, and that's just constant reps of scripting a video, editing a video, seeing what captions work well. So I think that was kind of the best way to learn. And then going to try and figure out the next step when I graduate from school.
To you, what makes a great story?
I think it's just the main thing for me is something no one's heard of before. Because if you're covering something and everyone's already heard of it, no one's really going to watch the video. So, like example, Josh Allen, he has a great story, how his rise to the NFL. But even if people haven't heard it, they think they have because they know Josh Allen. So it'd be really hard to hook a video of like, this is how Josh Allen rose to the NFL. Because everyone thinks they know Josh Allen. Even if they don't know the story, they're not going to keep watching. So the main thing is to kind of find something people haven't heard of and then just hook them in and tell a great story.
That's great, Don. I appreciate it. I'm honestly taking some notes for me because the kind of content you crank out is awesome. And the stories that you tell are always super captivating. And I feel like that's definitely an element to it. You tell the stories of like underrated players and maybe players who
Yeah.
fly under the radar who have got some great stories to tell. Don, your at is at Donald Coletta everywhere, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's on the screen right now for our audience watching on YouTube. It'll be in the link of the description of YouTube. I super appreciate your time. You are the best. Thank you so much for stopping by. And yeah, hope whatever team you are rooting for this season ends up finishing off well. Do you have a favorite NFL team?
So this is a tough one. So I grew up a Patriots fan, and it's just like everything was championships. Like we just win every time. So I got a bad perception on how sports work. And then when Brady left for the Bucks, it was like maybe I'm more of a Brady fan. So now I root for the Bucks with Brady because it's like this guy's won you so many Super Bowls your entire life. All you've known is Tom Brady. So it was hard to stick to the Patriots. So now more so I root for players. I really like Caleb right now, but still Patriots in a sense because I'm in like the New England area. But
That is exactly
more
the
so
path
players.
of my fandom as well, which is weird. I grew up in Miami, so I was considered a bandwagon fan 100%. Rooted for Tom Brady, rooted for Tom when he went down to Tampa, and now it feels like I'm just rooting for players and like kind of really nerdy here. Like I also like root for great GMs, great coaches.
Yeah,
Like I just want situational people like to do well.
100%. Even Mike McDaniel. I love Mike McDaniel. So root for the Dolphins a little bit. It's more the guy than the team. I feel like, especially not having a team close. I mean, we have the Jets, Patriots, and Giants, but like not one team. So it's kind of opens up to root for a bunch of different teams, a bunch of different players. And then you realize like you don't want to root for owners. These are like billion-dollar guys. Instead, you want to root for like the guy with a cool story who needs to win. So that's what I find myself rooting for more.
100%. I agree. Now, I do have a team about 30 minutes away, but I've always said I am not someone who wants to be a fan, or I don't want to be married to mediocrity. Like, I don't want to wake up on a Sunday and be like, okay, we're rooting to go 500 this season, which is what the Dolphins have been my entire lifetime. So I'm going to take it on the shins. I don't have as good of an excuse as you do. I simply don't like to lose. That's kind of my thought on it.
You guys are in the playoff, huh? Potentially.
I have I have a whole take on that entire situation that I will save for another day. But Don, I appreciate you coming on,
Thank you.
man. And yeah, best of luck to you and have a good, happy holiday. I know the semester's ending, so we are going to feel a little bit more relieved going into the ending of this
A
year.
nice break.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Don. I
It was
appreciate
great
it.
to
Thanks
talk
for
to you.
stopping by.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we conclude this week's episode of the Benjamin Cure Show. Thank you so much for Don to tuning in. Thank you so much to all of you for watching until this point. The NFL season is bubbling right now. Obviously, college football, the playoff is around the corner. Can't wait to see what those rankings look like on Tuesday. To me, I believe Texas is going to win the entire thing. I disagree entirely with that tweet that I saw from an FSU fan about how, oh, you can't simply put them in there when they lose Quinn Ewers if he's out for the season because of what happened to FSU last year. FSU didn't have Arch Manning as a backup, and that is a terrible comparison in my opinion. I'll see you next Monday.